No child should ever have to beg a king to notice their tears. The great courtyard of Silver Hollow Citadel shimmered beneath the pale glow of the harvest moon, its polished white stone reflecting thousands of golden lanterns that swayed gently in the cool autumn breeze. Every pack across the Northern Territories had gathered for the Moon Honor Assembly, the one night each year when even the proudest alpha lowered his head before the ancient laws that bound them together. Banners embroidered with silver wolves stretched between towering marble columns, while musicians filled the crisp evening air with slow, dignified melodies that echoed across the valley for miles. Noble families arrived in gleaming carriages, their elegant cloaks brushing spotless steps as servants hurried behind them carrying jeweled gifts for the crown. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder in perfectly ordered ranks, their ceremonial armor catching the lantern light like rows of quiet stars. No one dared speak above a whisper because tonight belonged to one man. Alpha King Cale Thornridge entered the courtyard without announcement, yet the entire gathering sensed his presence before they saw him. Conversations faded. Music softened. Hundreds of heads bowed almost as one while the powerful ruler crossed the long stone path with calm, measured steps. He wore no crown of gold, only a simple silver circlet resting against dark hair, as though true authority required no decoration. His expression remained unreadable, his silver eyes sweeping across the assembled packs with the quiet patience of someone who had witnessed every form of pride, fear, loyalty, and deception. Among the endless sea of richly dressed nobles stood Evelyn Carter, carefully keeping herself near the very back of the crowd where shadows gathered beneath the balcony. Her faded blue dress had been mended so many times that the stitches formed delicate patterns across the sleeves, and the plain gray shawl wrapped around her shoulders did little to hide how worn the fabric had become. She kept her chin lowered, hoping the evening would pass without anyone remembering her name. Beside her stood her 6-year-old son, Noah, whose small hand never let go of hers for more than a heartbeat. His soft blonde curls caught the lantern light as he stared wide-eyed at the magnificent castle, seeing wonder where adults only noticed status. To Noah, tonight looked like something from the bedtime stories his mother whispered whenever thunderstorms rattled the windows of their tiny cottage. Evelyn smiled gently at him despite the nervous ache pressing against her chest. She wanted him to remember beauty instead of whispers, music instead of judgment. She knelt just enough to straighten the collar of his little brown coat, brushing invisible dust from the fabric before smoothing his hair with careful fingers. "Stay close to me," she murmured softly. Noah nodded without complaint, but his bright blue eyes wandered through the crowd until they settled on the distant figure of the Alpha King. There was no fear in the boy's face, only innocent curiosity. Around them, elegant guests exchanged polite smiles while quieter conversations drifted like smoke through the cool night air. Some glanced toward Evelyn before quickly looking away. Others lingered just long enough for silent assumptions to settle across their faces. She had grown used to those looks years ago. They no longer stung the way they once had. What still hurt was knowing no one noticed them too. She squeezed his hand a little tighter as the royal herald stepped onto the grand staircase to begin the ceremony. Trumpets echoed across the courtyard. Every eye turned toward the throne platform. Every voice disappeared into complete silence. And in that single breath before the first official words were spoken, Noah suddenly released his mother's hand and started running straight toward the Alpha King. Gasps rippled through the enormous courtyard as Noah slipped between rows of startled guards before anyone realized what the small boy was doing. His little boots struck the polished stone in hurried, uneven steps, his tiny frame weaving past richly dressed nobles who instinctively stepped aside in confusion rather than stopping him. Evelyn's heart lurched into her throat. "Noah," she called, her voice barely carrying above the stunned silence that had settled over the assembly. Panic overtook every thought as she hurried after him, but the distance between them widened with every heartbeat. The royal guards exchanged uncertain glances. No child had ever crossed the ceremonial path during the Moon Honor Assembly. Training told them to intervene immediately, yet none of them wished to risk startling the Alpha King by rushing forward without command. Cale Thornridge had already noticed the movement. His calm silver eyes followed the little boy with quiet curiosity instead of annoyance. He did not step back. He did not raise a hand. He simply stood still, allowing the child to approach. Noah reached him completely out of breath. His small chest rose and fell rapidly as tears filled his bright blue eyes. For a brief moment, he looked up at the towering ruler as though searching for the courage to speak. Then, with trembling hands, he wrapped both arms around the Alpha King's leg as tightly as he could. The entire courtyard froze. Hundreds of people watched without daring to breathe. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Noah buried his face against the dark fabric of Kale's ceremonial cloak, his tiny shoulders shaking as quiet sobs escaped him. "Please," he whispered at first, almost too softly for anyone else to hear. Kale slowly lowered his gaze toward the child. There was no irritation in his expression, only steady attention. He bent one knee until he was nearly at eye level with the frightened little boy. The simple movement alone sent another wave of astonishment through the gathered packs. Kings did not kneel during royal ceremonies. Yet Kale remained there, patient and silent, waiting for Noah to find his voice. The little boy looked into the king's face with desperate hope that only a child could carry. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he finally managed to speak clearly enough for the entire courtyard to hear. "They hurt my mom." The words seemed to linger in the cool evening air long after Noah finished speaking. No accusation could have carried greater weight. No carefully prepared speech could have silenced the assembly more completely than those 5 trembling words. Evelyn stopped several yards away, unable to move another step. Her face turned pale as every eye in the courtyard shifted toward her. She wanted to call Noah back, to tell him everything was fine, to spare him from the attention now falling upon them both. But the words refused to come. Kale studied the child's tearful face for several long seconds before speaking in a voice so calm that everyone instinctively leaned closer to hear. "Who hurt your mother?" Noah tightened his small fingers around the king's cloak as though afraid the courage inside him might disappear if he let go. He glanced over his shoulder toward the crowded gathering, his frightened eyes searching among rows of noble faces. Several guests quietly looked away. Others remained perfectly still. Evelyn could feel dozens of silent judgments pressing against her from every direction, yet for the first time in years, one pair of eyes looked at her without dismissal. The Alpha King did not look at her clothing. He did not look at her place among the crowd. He simply waited, giving both mother and son something they had almost forgotten still existed: the chance to be heard. Noah swallowed hard, his tiny fingers still clutching the edge of Kale's cloak as though it were the only safe place left in the world. The little boy slowly lifted one trembling hand and pointed toward the outer edge of the gathered nobles. His arm shook so badly that several people instinctively followed the direction of his finger before realizing where he was pointing. A small group of elegantly dressed aristocrats stiffened almost at once. Their confident smiles disappeared, replaced by carefully controlled expressions that revealed nothing and everything at the same time. Evelyn closed her eyes for the briefest moment. She had hoped the evening would end without anyone noticing her. Instead, every face in the courtyard had turned toward her. She felt the familiar weight of unwanted attention settle across her shoulders. But this time something was different. No one laughed. No one whispered. They were all waiting. Kale slowly rose to his full height, though his attention never completely left the frightened child beside him. His voice remained calm, carrying easily across the silent courtyard without needing to be raised. "Bring the boy's mother forward." The royal guards obeyed immediately, though their movements remained gentle. Evelyn hesitated before taking a careful step onto the polished stone path reserved for honored guests and royal officials. Never in her life had she imagined walking that path. Her worn shoes felt strangely loud against the marble as hundreds of eyes followed every step. Noah finally released the king's cloak and hurried back toward her, wrapping both arms around her waist before she could say a word. She rested one hand against his soft hair, trying to calm both his racing heart and her own. Kale watched the quiet embrace for several long seconds. There was something about the way the child instinctively shielded his mother instead of hiding behind her that caught his attention. Fear usually made children seek protection. Noah seemed determined to become it. "What is your name?" Kale asked. Evelyn lowered her eyes respectfully. "Evelyn Carter, Your Majesty." "And this is your son?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Kale nodded once before looking directly at Noah again. "You said someone hurt your mother." Noah looked up at Evelyn first, searching her face as though asking permission without words. She gently brushed a tear from his cheek, but said nothing. Whatever choice he made now had to be his own. The little boy turned back toward the Alpha King. They pushed her because she would not give them Grandpa's necklace. His voice remained soft, yet every word carried clearly through the silent courtyard. Mama said it belonged to my grandma before she went to heaven. She said we should keep it forever. Evelyn's heart tightened. She had never told Noah to speak about that afternoon. She had tried to protect him from remembering it, believing children deserved lighter memories than adults could afford. Apparently, love remembered everything that fear wished to forget. Cale noticed the thin silver chain resting beneath the collar of Evelyn's faded dress. It was simple, worn smooth by years of careful use. Hardly the kind of treasure that wealthy nobles would normally notice. Yet the way her fingers instinctively rested over it suggested its value had nothing to do with money. The Alpha King's silver eyes shifted briefly toward the nobles Noah had pointed at moments earlier. None of them spoke. None of them volunteered an explanation. Their silence settled over the assembly like an approaching winter storm. Cale returned his attention to Evelyn, studying the quiet dignity with which she stood despite standing completely alone before the most powerful gathering in the kingdom. She neither begged for sympathy nor rushed to defend herself. She simply held her son close, as though his safety mattered infinitely more than her own reputation. For reasons he could not yet explain, Cale found himself wondering not whether the child believed his mother, but why every instinct he possessed told him the child was telling the truth. The silence lasted only a few seconds before it fractured beneath the polished confidence of the noble families, standing where Noah had pointed. A tall man in an emerald green ceremonial coat stepped forward with an easy smile that never reached his pale eyes. Lord Adrian Blackwood bowed respectfully toward the throne before turning just enough to acknowledge Evelyn with a look of practiced disappointment. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "I believe this unfortunate misunderstanding deserves proper context before honest citizens are judged by the fears of an emotional child." Several nobles beside him nodded in quiet agreement. Lady Beatrice Holloway folded her gloved hands gracefully and sighed as though burdened by unnecessary drama. "The woman has always been difficult," she added gently. "Many people have tried to help her, yet she often mistakes ordinary conversations for insults." A few polite murmurs spread through the gathering. Another gentleman stepped forward. "Her son is young. Children repeat what they believe they saw. They do not always understand what truly happened." Evelyn remained perfectly still. She had heard these voices before. Calm voices. Respectable voices. Voices that could transform kindness into suspicion and honesty into embarrassment with nothing more than carefully chosen words. Noah frowned as he looked from one noble face to another. Confusion mixed with hurt inside his young eyes. They were speaking so politely now that they sounded like completely different people. The little boy tightened his grip on his mother's hand. "That is not true," he whispered, but his voice nearly disappeared beneath the growing whispers surrounding them. Lord Adrian offered the Alpha King another respectful bow. "Your Majesty, the necklace in question was displayed openly during the market festival several days ago. Some people merely admired the family keepsake and suggested that such an item would be safer under proper protection. No threats were made. No harm was intended." Lady Beatrice smiled warmly toward Evelyn, though the warmth never touched her eyes. Perhaps fear has made the memory seem larger than it truly was. Life has not been easy for Miss Carter. We all sympathize with that. Several guests slowly relaxed, grateful for an explanation that restored comfort to the evening. It was always easier to believe respected names than quiet strangers. Evelyn felt Noah tremble beside her. She knelt so that her eyes met his. "Look at me," she whispered softly. "You have done nothing wrong." Noah searched her face. "But they are saying it did not happen." Evelyn brushed a tear from his cheek with gentle fingers. "Sometimes people are afraid of the truth." Cale watched every exchange without interrupting. His expression revealed nothing. The stillness around him became almost unsettling. He did not reward the nobles with agreement, nor did he comfort Evelyn with immediate reassurance. He simply listened. That silence slowly became heavier than any accusation. Captain Rowan Hayes of the Royal Guard stood only a few feet away, carefully studying the king's face. He had served Cale for nearly 15 years. He recognized the look. Whenever the Alpha King grew completely quiet, it never meant he had reached a conclusion. It meant he had only begun asking questions inside his own mind. Cale's silver eyes moved from Lord Adrian to Lady Beatrice, then to Noah, whose small hand still refused to leave his mother's. Finally, his gaze rested on Evelyn herself. She had not interrupted anyone. She had not pleaded for mercy. She had not tried to defend herself against a room filled with influential voices. Instead, every ounce of her attention remained focused on comforting her frightened son. The Alpha King noticed something the others had overlooked. Whenever the nobles spoke, they watched him. Whenever Evelyn spoke, she watched Noah. That single difference lingered quietly in his thoughts. Then, without raising his voice even slightly, Cale asked one simple question that caused every confident smile in the courtyard to begin fading. If nothing happened, why is the child still afraid? Noah looked up at the Alpha King with eyes still shining from tears, but this time, there was something stronger than fear inside them. There was determination. He drew a slow breath exactly as his mother had taught him whenever he felt frightened, then pointed once more toward the group of nobles. They smiled when other people were watching, he said quietly. But when nobody looked, they were different. The simple words carried across the courtyard with a sincerity that no practiced speech could imitate. Cale did not interrupt. He merely nodded once, inviting the child to continue. Noah swallowed. Mama told me not to be angry. She said Grandpa always said kind people stay kind even when nobody is looking. His small voice trembled. She tried to walk away, but they kept asking for her necklace. They said poor people do not deserve family treasures. A heavy stillness settled over the assembly. Several guests exchanged uncertain glances. Lord Adrian's confident smile became noticeably thinner. Your Majesty, he said smoothly. The child is remembering ordinary conversation through frightened eyes. Before Cale could respond, another voice unexpectedly rose from the crowd. That is not what I saw. Every head turned toward an elderly woman dressed in the modest brown uniform of a palace gardener. Her silver hair was neatly tied beneath a simple scarf, and soil still marked the edges of her weathered hands despite tonight's ceremony. She lowered herself into a respectful bow before speaking again. My name is Martha Collins. I maintain the Rose Gardens beside the Eastern Market Road. I was trimming the hedges that afternoon. Lord Adrian's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Martha continued with calm honesty. The young mother never argued. She only held her little boy's hand and thanked them before trying to leave. I remember because I thought she carried herself with remarkable grace. She paused, looking directly at Cale. I also remember seeing the little boy hide behind her skirt while she quietly protected him from words no child should have to hear. The courtyard grew even quieter. Lady Beatrice quickly stepped forward. Surely an elderly gardener may have misunderstood pieces of the conversation. Perhaps, Martha answered gently. That is possible. She smiled kindly before adding, but flowers teach patience. When you spend your life observing quietly, you notice who speaks kindly to servants and who only speaks kindly to important people. Several servants, standing near the outer staircase, lowered their eyes. One young stable hand nervously shifted his weight before gathering enough courage to raise his hand. Your Majesty, he said, his voice shaking. I was delivering grain to the market that afternoon. I saw Miss Carter walking away with her son. The little boy kept asking why some people smiled with angry eyes. Noah looked toward the stable hand in surprise. He remembered him. The young man had secretly given him a warm apple that same afternoon after seeing him cry. Cale noticed the recognition pass between them. More importantly, he noticed something else. None of the witnesses appeared eager for attention. None attempted to embarrass the nobles standing before them. They simply answered because they had been given permission to speak. The Alpha King's silver eyes slowly returned to Evelyn. She seemed almost overwhelmed by the unexpected kindness surrounding her. For so long she had stood alone that she no longer expected strangers to defend her. Noah gently slipped his tiny hand into hers again and looked up with a hopeful smile that had not appeared since entering the courtyard. Cale understood then that truth rarely arrived as one dramatic revelation. More often it appeared through ordinary people who finally found the courage to tell what they had quietly carried in their hearts all along. The last witness stepped back into the crowd, and with him the final whisper of uncertainty seemed to disappear. The courtyard stood so still that the distant crackle of lantern flames became the only sound beneath the harvest moon. Cale Thornridge allowed the silence to linger, giving every person gathered one final opportunity to speak. No one did. Lord Adrian lowered his eyes for only a heartbeat before lifting them again with practiced composure. Your Majesty, misunderstandings often grow larger when repeated by many voices. Cale regarded him without expression. They do, he replied evenly. Truth becomes larger the same way. The words settled across the assembly with quiet force. Slowly, the Alpha King stepped down from the raised platform. The movement surprised everyone. Kings rarely left the ceremonial dais before the conclusion of the Moon Honor Assembly. His measured footsteps echoed across the polished marble until he stood only a few feet from Evelyn and Noah. The little boy instinctively moved closer to his mother, but he no longer hid behind her. Cale noticed the change. Courage had quietly replaced fear. The Alpha King turned toward Captain Rowan Hayes. Captain. Yes, Your Majesty. Record every statement given tonight exactly as it was spoken. Immediately, Your Majesty. Rowan signaled two royal scribes, who hurried forward with parchment and ink, carefully writing every witness account without omission. Cale then faced the assembled nobles. His voice remained calm, yet no one mistook its authority. The law of the Northern Territories protects every citizen equally. Wealth does not strengthen truth. Rank does not erase responsibility. Reputation does not outweigh honesty. Several members of the Royal Council slowly bowed their heads. Even those who had remained neutral understood the meaning behind his words. Cale continued, his silver eyes moving from face to face. Until this matter is fully reviewed by the royal court, Lord Adrian Blackwood and Lady Beatrice Holloway will surrender their ceremonial privileges and refrain from representing the crown at any public gathering. Audible gasps swept through the courtyard. It was not a criminal sentence. It was something far more unexpected. Public trust had been withdrawn. For families whose influence depended upon honor, the decision struck deeper than any harsh punishment. Lord Adrian's confident posture finally faltered. Your Majesty, he began carefully. Surely such action before a formal hearing may create unnecessary speculation. Cale met his gaze steadily. Justice begins with listening. Tonight, someone who had never before been heard finally found a voice. No one answered. Even the evening breeze seemed to pause among the hanging banners. The Alpha King turned his attention toward the gathered servants, merchants, guards, and ordinary families standing at the edges of the celebration. If any citizen has remained silent because they believe their station made their words unimportant, let tonight correct that belief forever. Martha Collins lowered her head, quietly wiping tears from the corners of her eyes. The young stable hand smiled with visible relief. Around them, servants exchanged uncertain but hopeful glances. For the first time in years, many felt that someone had noticed they existed. Noah looked up at Cale with open admiration. Does that mean people have to tell the truth now? He asked innocently. A faint smile touched the Alpha King's face, so subtle that only those nearest to him recognized it. It means they always should have. Noah smiled for the first time since entering the courtyard. Evelyn watched her son with grateful eyes, still struggling to believe everything unfolding before her was real. She had expected another evening of quiet endurance. Instead, she had witnessed the most powerful man in the kingdom remind every pack that dignity could not be measured by titles or wealth. Yet as Cale looked toward her once more, he felt an unfamiliar certainty settle deep within his heart. This night was not ending. Somehow, it was only the beginning. Evelyn lowered herself into a respectful bow, her fingers resting lightly on Noah's shoulders as if reminding herself he was truly safe. The brilliant lanterns surrounding the courtyard blurred for a moment as gratitude overwhelmed emotions she had kept hidden for years. When she finally raised her head, her voice remained steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. Your Majesty, thank you for listening to my son. Cale regarded her quietly. Your thanks belong to him, he answered. He found the courage to speak before those who were afraid to. Noah looked up proudly, though he immediately hid his smile against his mother's arm. Evelyn gently brushed another curl away from his forehead before meeting the Alpha King's gaze once more. If I may ask one favor, she said softly. A faint ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. After everything that had happened, many expected her to demand punishment, compensation, or public recognition. Cale inclined his head. Speak freely. Evelyn drew a slow breath. Please do not let Noah remember this night, because people argued about us. I would rather he remember that someone chose kindness. The word surprised everyone. Lord Adrian stared at her in disbelief. Lady Beatrice looked away, unable to meet the quiet dignity reflected in Evelyn's expression. She had been given the rare opportunity to humiliate those who had humiliated her, yet she refused to take it. Noah tugged gently on her sleeve. Mama. She smiled warmly at him. Yes, sweetheart. Are we going home now? She nodded. If His Majesty allows it. Cale studied the woman standing before him. Throughout the entire evening, she had never asked for herself. Every request, every glance, every decision had revolved around protecting the small boy beside her. She had remained composed while others questioned her honesty. She had accepted being overlooked if it meant Noah would feel safe. Strength came in many forms, Cale realized. Some carried swords. Others carried frightened children without allowing bitterness to touch their hearts. He slowly descended the final step, separating them. The movement was simple, yet it erased the invisible distance between a king and one of his quietest subjects. Noah instinctively looked up at the towering alpha. Cale crouched until they stood nearly. Eye to eye once again. You love your mother very much, he said. Noah nodded without hesitation. She takes care of everybody. Cale glanced toward Evelyn. And who takes care of her? The little boy blinked. He looked at his mother, then back at the king. His innocent silence answered the question more honestly than words ever could. Evelyn quickly smiled, hoping to ease the unexpected sadness settling across the gathering. We manage very well, Your Majesty. Cale noticed the answer she chose. Not we are well. Not everything is fine. Simply, we manage. There was quiet resilience inside those words, but also years of carrying burdens without complaint. Captain Rowan watched the exchange from nearby, recognizing the thoughtful expression that had begun to settle across the king's face. Cale only looked at people that way when something deeper had captured his attention. The Alpha King slowly rose to his feet, though his gaze remained fixed on the worn silver necklace resting against Evelyn's collar. As the moonlight reflected across its weathered surface, a faint shimmer flickered for the briefest instant, so subtle that almost no one noticed it. Almost no one except Cale. An unfamiliar warmth stirred beneath the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, ancient and unmistakable, like a forgotten melody returning after many years of silence. He had felt that quiet pull only once before, long ago in stories spoken by the oldest elders, stories describing how destiny announced itself not with thunder, but with the gentlest whisper beneath the light of the moon. Cale could not explain the feeling that settled over him as the moonlight touched the old silver necklace resting against Evelyn's collar. It was not merely recognition. It was familiarity, as though a forgotten promise had quietly awakened after years of silence. The elders had once spoken of moments like this during his childhood, describing how destiny never shouted. It waited patiently until two lives crossed at exactly the right moment. Cale had dismissed those stories as comforting legends meant for young wolves. Standing before Evelyn Carter, he found himself questioning everything he had believed. The faint shimmer disappeared almost as quickly as it had appeared. No one else seemed to notice. Noah leaned against his mother with a sleepy yawn after the long evening, and Evelyn gently wrapped her shawl more securely around his shoulders. Even after everything that had happened, her first instinct remained protecting her son from the cool autumn air. Cale watched the quiet gesture without realizing he had taken a step closer. The distance between them narrowed until only a few feet remained. Evelyn lowered her eyes respectfully. Is something wrong, Your Majesty? He hesitated before answering. May I see your necklace? A brief flicker of surprise crossed her face. She carefully lifted the delicate silver chain from beneath her dress. The pendant was small and simple, worn smooth by many years of loving hands. It carried no gemstones or royal markings, only an engraved crescent moon almost erased by time. Evelyn smiled softly as she looked down at it. It belonged to my grandfather, she said. Before he passed away, he told me it had protected our family for generations. I never believed it possessed any special power. It simply reminds me that I am never truly alone. Cale reached out slowly, stopping just short of touching the pendant. The moment his hand drew near, a gentle warmth spread through the cool night air. It was not bright enough to alarm the crowd, only a quiet silver glow that danced briefly across the worn surface before fading once more. Noah's eyes grew wide. "Mama," he whispered excitedly. "Your necklace," smiled. Evelyn blinked in confusion, believing her son had imagined it. But Captain Rowan had seen it too. So had Martha Collins, who quietly pressed one weathered hand against her heart. None of them spoke. Cale slowly lowered his hand, thoughtful rather than startled. Deep within him, something ancient stirred with quiet certainty. It was the same calm instinct that had guided generations of Alpha Kings long before written history. Not command, not possession, recognition. He looked into Evelyn's gentle blue eyes and saw no ambition, no desire for influence, only kindness worn thin by years of hardship, yet never extinguished. The realization unsettled him more than any battlefield ever had. The moon goddess had never been known to choose based on wealth, titles, or appearances. She chose hearts capable of protecting others before themselves. His gaze shifted toward Noah, who smiled proudly while holding his mother's hand with complete trust. Cale suddenly understood why the child had run to him instead of away from everyone else. Noah had not searched for the strongest wolf in the kingdom. He had searched for the one person he still believed would listen. The Alpha King felt an unfamiliar weight settle inside his chest. It was responsibility, but it was also hope. Somewhere beyond the courtyard, the ancient temple bell rang once, its deep tone rolling gently across the valley beneath the silver moon. Several elderly wolves quietly exchanged knowing glances. They had heard that bell countless times before, yet tonight its echo carried an unusual warmth. Cale lifted his eyes toward the glowing moon overhead. For the first time in many years, the future no longer felt like a burden he carried alone. Somehow, without warning, destiny had already stepped into his path wearing a faded blue dress and holding the hand of a little boy brave enough to remind an entire kingdom what true courage looked like. The deep echo of the temple bell slowly faded into the night, yet no one in the courtyard seemed willing to move. Thousands of eyes remained fixed on the three figures standing beneath the silver glow of the harvest moon. Cale Thornridge looked at Evelyn, then at Noah, and understood that the kingdom had witnessed something far greater than a royal ceremony. They had witnessed truth spoken by the smallest voice among them. The Alpha King stepped forward one final time and extended his hand toward Evelyn. She looked at it in quiet surprise, uncertain whether she should accept such an unexpected gesture. Around them, every noble, every servant, every warrior watched without blinking. After a hesitant breath, Evelyn placed her hand gently in his. Cale did not lift it high for spectacle. He simply held it with calm respect before turning to face the assembled packs. His voice carried across the marble courtyard with steady authority. Tonight, a child reminded this kingdom that courage is not measured by strength. It is measured by the willingness to speak when silence feels safer. No one interrupted. Even the evening wind seemed to listen. Cale continued, "Justice does not belong only to those with titles. It belongs to every honest voice, no matter how small." He looked toward Noah and offered the little boy a warm smile, especially the smallest. Noah's face lit up with shy pride. He carefully slipped his tiny hand into the Alpha King's free hand without fear. Standing between them, he looked from Cale to his mother and smiled as though the entire world had suddenly become brighter. Soft laughter filled the courtyard, not mocking laughter, but the gentle kind that rises when hope quietly returns. Cale glanced toward Captain Rowan Hayes. "See that Miss Evelyn Carter and her son are given safe escort home tonight. Beginning tomorrow, the Royal Council will establish a hearing office where every citizen, regardless of rank or station, may bring grievances without fear of being ignored." The announcement spread through the gathering like sunrise after a long winter. Servants exchanged astonished smiles. Merchants nodded quietly. Even visiting pack leaders looked at one another with renewed respect. Martha Collins wiped another grateful tear from her cheek, whispering that perhaps the kingdom truly was changing. Lord Adrian and Lady Beatrice lowered their heads in silence, understanding that influence could be restored only through integrity, never through appearances alone. Evelyn looked at Cale with genuine gratitude. "Your Majesty," she said softly, "you have given my son something I could not." Kale tilted his head slightly. What is that? She smiled through quiet tears. The belief that someone important will listen when he tells the truth. The Alpha King looked down at Noah, whose small fingers still rested comfortably in his own. Then promise me something, Kale said. Noah nodded eagerly. Keep being brave. The little boy smiled. I will if you keep listening. Kale chuckled softly, a sound so rare that several members of the royal court exchanged surprised glances. That is a promise. Above them, the full moon shone brighter than ever, bathing the ancient courtyard in gentle silver light. Evelyn looked up for only a moment before returning her attention to her son, exactly as she always had. Kale noticed the gesture once more and understood why destiny had chosen this quiet family to cross his path. Greatness was never found only on thrones. Sometimes it lived inside ordinary people who chose kindness even after life had given them every reason to become bitter. As Evelyn and Noah prepared to leave beneath their royal escort, Noah turned around one last time and waved enthusiastically at the Alpha King. Kale raised his hand in return, watching until mother and son disappeared through the great gates together. Long after the lanterns dimmed and the courtyard emptied, people would remember that night not because a king had spoken, but because one small child had loved his mother enough to believe that truth was always worth telling. And from that moment forward, the Northern Territories would never again mistake quiet hearts for powerless ones.